Hey everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. My name is Eric Skwarczynski. I'm a former fundamentalist who is now shedding light on the dark side of the church from the pulpit to the pews. And if you are a listener of the show and you follow over on social media, you probably saw me soliciting some questions from the audience for this very special Q&A episode. I'm not going to be able to get to every single question that was asked, and there were some that prompted really good topic ideas for future episodes. I know some people were asking for things that required a bit more research or things that I might not know off the top of my head. And so just because you asked and I may not answer in this episode, you did not ask in vain. Thank you so much for all of them. They always get my wheels turning, help me understand what you as a listener are wanting to see more of or what's on your mind lately as we talk about these topics. I pulled a couple different questions here. I'm going to just answer them as honestly and openly as I can and kind of roll from there. I think I ended up pulling 8 questions. So I'll go ahead and answer those, like I said, in no particular order. And again, if yours isn't answered on this particular episode, it might be answered on a future episode like this. I want to start doing some more Q&A episodes like this and just, start diving through the questions that people have, especially as, fundamentalism shows up in pop culture. I'm sure there's going to be people watching, Welcome to Plathville that have, topics that they start asking about, as people are reading books or listening to sermons. Like there's going to be a lot of things to hear about, to react to. So before I get started, if you have a question or if you have something you'd love to hear me talk about on one of these episodes, just drop that in the comments of this video, and I'd love to take a look at them and see where people's minds are at. But first and foremost, the question I wanted to answer, someone said, what is the latest of the Steven Anderson cult and his children who exposed him? For those of you that have been following for a minute, you probably remember that back in, when was that? It was a couple months ago, maybe a year ago, that I actually had John Anderson, who's one of Steven Anderson's kids, on the podcast. Let me see what date that was. September 11th, 2024, I had John on the show. If you haven't listened to that, it's available here on the channel, so be sure to go check that out. But there was a lot of noise happening around that time period. Steven Anderson's children had come forward and talked about varying levels of abuse within the Anderson household. There was a push for CPS to come visit his house. His daughter, who was just about to turn 18, ran away from home. Like there was a lot happening. And then it feels like it got pretty quiet. And so when I saw this question, I had a partial answer in mind because I actually saw Steven Anderson tweet the other day about one of these questions. But then I found something else over on X that really shocked me. Like I didn't know this was happening. I don't know how I missed it, but there it was. Look me in the face. The first thing I'll mention is in terms of what's happening with Steven Anderson, there are still people pushing for CPS to get involved. Anderson tweeted on July 8th, so 2 days ago as of this recording, CPS is at my house again today because someone reported my preaching as abusive. And they said maybe they should be investigating the people who raped teenagers at Epstein's Island instead of investigating a man of God. I don't think this is a and/or situation. It's more of a both-and situation, but have at it. Someone said, do not speak to CPS, don't open the door, and call attorney ASAP. And then Anderson said, I went that route for a while, but at this point, it's easier just to let them in and talk to them since there have been times where they were coming every week or even every day. So in terms of there being, pushes for CPS to get involved or to go visit Anderson, that's still happening. And CPS is, doing their investigations and walking away without anything. And so it seems like in terms of that angle of it, I don't know what's going to happen there. The other part that I found, I went on X to kind of look into Anderson and see, what was going on there, and ended up coming across a trailer for a documentary about Anderson. But what's really interesting is it's being created by, I think his name's Paul Wittenberger. That name might be familiar to you if you've gone deep down the fundamentalist rabbit hole. But Paul Wittenberger is a filmmaker who does a lot of conspiracy theory type videos. So if you know anybody who's been down that rabbit hole, you've seen probably DVDs on their shelf like What in the World Are They Spraying, and a documentary he produced with InfoWars called The Great Culling. And then he also did a lot of Christian films like After the Tribulation, New World Order Bible versions, Marching to Zion, Babylon USA, Beyond Jordan, and Deported. And almost all of those, I believe all of those Christian films were collaborations with Steven Anderson. And so the big twist is Wittenberger ended up cutting ties with Steven Anderson and is now producing a documentary where he interviewed a good portion of Anderson's children and is now kind of creating this takedown piece on him. I had no idea that they had, split, that him and Anderson no longer were connected. But beyond that, I did not know he was working on a documentary. It seems like it's fairly far along in production. I think from what I've seen, it looks like it's maybe a year out from releasing, but they've already done quite a bit of filming and things like that. So it's just, I was surprised it slipped under my radar with how much I'm in this world. In terms of the actual trailer, I'll go ahead and play that. I'm glad that there's a documentary being done on Anderson. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the filmmaker behind it, just because he does tend to be in the conspiracy hole a little bit, but also he might have a chance to be listened to by people in that world a little bit more. It's just, yeah. Anyway, well, I'll play the trailer and, let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Isaac Anderson, scene 2, take 1, Mark.
So many people experienced your dad's influence all over the world. But what was your experience of him at home?
With my dad at home, he was an extremely angry, abusive, and dangerous person. My dad is somebody who is very narcissistic, very obsessed with control, very obsessed with power. All he was is somebody God used. God can use somebody else. God appoints leaders, God takes them down.
Well, I mean, his public perception is that he's a loving husband and father with a happy marriage. The reality is they have separate bedrooms. They hate each other.
That's a huge revelation. I don't remember hearing that in any of the interviews, that they're in separate bedrooms, which is an interesting little added piece.
Dad was very abusive to my mom. My parents never got along. My mom was extremely abusive to her kids while outwardly putting out this front of being this happy mom and the joys of having a lot of kids. And there was a completely different story at home.
He wasn't just minorly hitting her. He was beating her very severely with an electrical cable. He was hitting her head into things. It was not anything that could be mistaken for some sort of fetish or whatever.
My mom spends probably about 70 to 80% of her waking hours enraged. It starts at about 6 in the morning. The screaming starts. You wake up during her screaming at this, that. My dad's outbursts were rare, but his were considerably more violent than hers.
That's pretty consistent with what John told me in our interview. At least I believe he said that in the interview. It's blending together with the conversation we had beforehand. It's been a minute since I've listened to the actual interview. But I know John told me, like, his dad's outbursts were less frequent, but more severe. His mom's were more frequent and, slightly less severe than his dad's, but both not good situations, obviously.
Everyone sees him this way, and they know that he gets crazy on screen, and they know that he's in the pulpit that way, but for some reason, the rest of us didn't see that.
This is interesting to me, and I've seen this guy before. I don't know who he is. I feel like I've seen him on podcasts and such. But it blew my mind hearing that line, and it blows my mind still hearing people go like, oh, we wouldn't have imagined that. And I'm like, you didn't? Like, with all the extreme rhetoric he uses and the way he behaves in his services, like, why would you expect his home life to be this, like, happy, I just don't understand how people missed this or didn't assume, obviously you don't know the details. Like, I don't think I sat there and went like, oh, I definitely think that Anderson is, hitting his wife and kids with an electrical cord, but I certainly didn't assume that he was a pleasant person to be around within the home, or that the mom would be a pleasant person to be around.
For some reason, the rest of us didn't see that.
They're not going to be like seeing everything that's happening behind the pulpit through the lens of what's happening at home.
Right. It's not like he was really, really good, but then he had this downfall.
Yeah, he in his sermon is talking about, if I'm disqualified now, I was disqualified when I made after the tribulation or whatever. Like, yeah, if we're going to play that game, yeah.
We don't need people like my dad to represent Christianity. Because currently, if you look up new IFB, it's going to be basically allegations of wife beating and people making excuses for wife beating. It's a bad look. That's why the bishop must be blameless, not the bishop must be good at preaching.
The two greatest days in the new IFB are the day you get in and the day you get out.
I love Tommy's face here because, I just dropped a line that's going in the trailer. Like, that's a trailer line right there. Oh, Tommy. I don't know if you guys remember, I used to do Tommy Tuesdays, and I would react to some of his preaching because he would mention me in some of his sermons, not typically too positively, but it was funny to see him pop in here. Yeah, and Tommy's somebody else that used to be really close friends with Anderson. So it's you're seeing a lot of people that have really cut ties with him in the last couple of years. So yeah,
I'm the man of God here. I meet the qualifications. I run this church, and if you don't like it, then get out.
So yeah, that's the film. I think they're still looking at getting some funding and stuff. They had an option to like donate a certain amount and be like an executive producer, and I was like, do I want to put my name as executive producer of the Man of God film directed by the filmmaker behind the COVID Land documentary narrated by Alex Jones? No, I did not want to put my name on that. But I will be watching the documentary. I'm glad the documentary exists. Many things can be true along the way. But yeah, I'm really curious to see what this does when it comes out. Because like I said, you know, I totally recognize I have no credibility with the people in kind of the NIFB world. But someone like Wittenberger really does. And so like maybe they'll listen to some of the stuff about Anderson from him, you know, if they won't hear it from someone on the outside like myself or like the interviews with Dead Domain. It's interesting to say the least. So that's what's going on with Anderson. And yeah, that answers that question, at least in part. Someone said, given your years of deep diving into this often secret darkness, what can those of us still living and serving in Christian communities keep our eyes out for? Signs that any attention from administration, etc. Although I'm a committed Christian, I do so appreciate what you're doing on your channel to expose the vile, truly evil folks that hide in the shadows. It's so painful to see so many victims, their trust betrayed, and their lives forever altered. The guilty should be punished to the full extent of the law. Keep it up, my friend. Yeah, if you're still within a Christian community, and this applies to anybody that's in a public school or anybody that's in a workplace, like the strategies and things are really the same. To answer the question specifically, like what should you keep your eyes out for? There's so many really good books that talk about this. You know, I think really if you're going to look at it in terms of like the organization first, there's certainly books I would recommend on that. A church called TOV, T-O-V, is a really great kind of Christian perspective look at like an organization that is, you know, thinking about the victim first. If you're looking for more like practical materials for protecting your church, you know, I can link to some of those in the show notes of this episode as well. There are a lot of good resources there. So I would say like first and foremost, as much as you can, push for your organization to be safe for victims, like creating a child protection policy, you know, working on having basic security measures set up. If you're in a Christian school, like monitoring communication between staff and students, if there is any. And so there's some steps like that. I would say when it comes to the individual level, I would recommend books like Predators by Anna Salter. I think I have it on my desk, actually. Let me rip that right out. There we go. Predators by Anna Salter really puts you in the, you know, in the mind of a predator and like what they're thinking. So Predators is a really good book. If you're looking specifically for like a Christian perspective, if you're, you know, want to read something from like a religious angle and you identify with the Christian faith, I highly recommend the book God Made All of Me. It's a really fantastic children's book that teaches basic bodily safety. And I think it was actually made in collaboration with Godly Response to Abuse in Christian Environments, Grace. But it talks about, you know, how to talk to your children about private parts. It tells you, like, here's a really good example. And this is something that I've, you know, implemented in my conversations and I've told people as well. Like it teaches about consent with touch. So it says, Mom said, if you don't want to be hugged or kissed or give a high five or a handshake, just say, you know, no, thank you, which is really great. It's very simple. You know, it talks about like your swimsuit areas, things like that, where you shouldn't be touched. And really, like, I just love how simple it makes all of this for kids to understand without being traumatizing by itself. But one of the really cool pieces here that I definitely tell people all the time is like, you never teach your kids to keep secrets. Instead, always teach them to focus on surprises. So for example, it says here, surprises are fun and make people happy. Secrets are different from surprises. Secrets are not nice. They can make people feel confused or sad. So again, that's just like a really simple principle that you can teach your kids. And again, even if you aren't, part of like the Christian faith, like there's a lot in this book that you could, it's just generally helpful advice. Like, the most that it gets like religious is just saying like, oh, you're made in the image of God, which, I don't think that's a horrible way to look at life. But anyway, this book is really fantastic and highly recommend it if you're looking for a Christian perspective. The other book that I would recommend that is absolutely fantastic and is written from a Christian perspective is specifically for churches, and it's called On Guard by Deepak Reshu, I believe is how you say it. And that book helps you walk through as a ministry, like how to create a child protection policy, what to do if a victim comes forward, like how to set up safeguards, how to think about the blueprint of your church. It's a really great manual. And I've actually sent it to a couple pastors who've reached out before asking for resources. So that's a couple, and I hope that's helpful. I'll link to another video that I did where I kind of walked through these. I did it back in November of 2020, so probably not too polished, but hopefully it'll give you a good list there. And I can link to these books in the show notes as well. Let's see here. Here's one. How's your wife doing? I asked her what I could say. She said she's doing very good. She's just a very private person, so you don't see a lot of her on social. Like, I always laugh when people post stuff like, you can always tell, like, or it's like people post like, oh, it's a red flag because a guy doesn't post to his wife. And I'm like, she does not want to be posted about. But no, she's doing really well. We just celebrated 9 years, which is awesome. And yeah, she's amazing and always pushing me to do stuff and to, keep doing stuff with the podcast, even though sometimes the podcast brings a lot of drama into our lives. She's just been amazing and supportive and couldn't do the show without her. So that's how she's doing. That's all the information you get on that one. Someone asked, how do you make friends or find community after high control religion, like practical advice? Honestly, my advice for this is, I'll give you 3 pieces because this is what's helped me. Working a secular job was huge. I think we came out of a really rocky exit out of ministry, and going and working as a marketer at a automotive group, it put me around people who had no context for the world that I just came out of. And getting to be around just good people who, weren't tied to anything that I knew before was really, really neat. The other piece I recommend is looking for like niche groups. This could literally be Facebook groups. A big helpful piece for me in terms of finding community was just for a while was, getting involved in movie groups on Facebook and like talking about cinema in different Facebook groups, and even got to the point with a couple of people, some that I'm still friends with, like, I watched through the Fast and the Furious series with this guy that I, talk to in this movie group all the time. He's like, you got to watch Fast and Furious. I was like, okay. And so I watched the series and like we would literally text while we're watching it or Facebook message while we're watching it, talking about the movies. Like it was just really simple points of interaction. And I think a big issue that people fall into when they like come out of a church environment is like, I think in church, you're kind of required to make like everyone family. And like, I built a lot of cool, like activity-based friendships that have been really neat where like, I don't have to go 10,000 miles deep with somebody, but we can share an activity or an interest together. And there's somebody that I'll shoot a message to if I see something that reminds me of them. So that's really cool. The last piece of advice that's deeply relatable to me, starting a podcast has been the piece, right? And I know that's not for everybody, but I'm just saying, like, for me, that has been a huge way for me to find new friends. It gives me an excuse to talk to them. Again, I have a podcast that I ran for a while that was like about movies that I go in and out of doing stuff with. And I've made a lot of great relationships through that. I've made a lot of relationships that are like close friends doing this podcast. Some of whom I literally talked to on the phone just the other day that have just become really good friends. And so, but I would seriously say just find something you're interested in, maybe find a Facebook group connected to it, preferably obviously a closed Facebook group, and start sharing some interest there, or, look for ways to engage in your community. If there's like local meetups and stuff, like I know when you're married or have a kid, like this is tricky, but if you're a single person, like get out of your environment a little bit and try to meet people around shared interests, whether it's a trivia night or conventions or, like I said, movie watch parties or whatever it is. Like, start getting involved with some other stuff. The other piece here, someone said, can you talk about Turmoil in the Toy Box? This book messed up all our childhoods. I read that and I was like, I've never heard of Turmoil in the Toy Box. But I definitely know some of the beliefs that were shared in that book, now that I've looked into it, definitely affected all of our childhoods, probably. They grew up in fundamentalism. Turmoil in the Toy Box was a book written by a guy named Phil Phillips, not to be confused with Philip Phillips, who was the American Idol winner. I don't know if that joke went over. Let me know if you laughed in the comments. But it talked about the way that toys and cartoons are being used to introduce the occult, violence, and pagan religions to millions of our children. I love anything from the Satanic Panic era of like the late 80s and the early 90s. And so this was right up my alley. And I was thrilled to see that there was a television program that tied into this book. First of all, I bought a copy of the book and it gets here in like 2 weeks. So I'll report back. But there was also an accompanying video that someone ripped the VHS and put it on YouTube. Really, the program is just these same talking points over and over again, but it's incredibly enjoyable.
I'm Gary Greenwald, and over the past several years, the Eagle's Nest Ministries has exposed certain things like rock and roll music, Dungeons and Dragons, marijuana, and even the New Age movement. And now we feel there's another attack upon our society. If I say something like wicked witches and demon clouds and spell books and even the zone of eternal evil, what comes to mind? What do you think of? Do you think of a coven of witches or a seance? Watch now.
Wicked witches, demon clouds? Where do we start, Mr. Van Gool?
You start by getting that.
I can't even tell you how excited I was when I was watching through 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo last year and saw Vincent Price show up in Scooby-Doo. Like, it's like peanut butter and jelly. Like, that match was incredible.
Clouds? Where do we start, Mr. Van Gool?
You start by getting that spell book before those foolish witches destroy the world.
We've got some witches to splat.
You coming with us, Mr. V? I'm afraid I cannot.
Like,
we're not into witches either, sir. We'll stick with you. If you wish, I'm going to hunt down that demon mist in the zone of eternal evil where the darkest spirits are trapped. Like, on second thought, send us a postcard.
good luck with the mist, Mr. V.
If they don't recover that book, no amount of luck will save us.
If this program so far is to make me not want to pop in 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, it's failing me.
Powers locked within this stone, transport me now to the evil zone. I hope I find that mist.
You know, you've been watching a Scooby-Doo cartoon, and it's amazing to me to see what's being brought forth in a cartoon. We've seen spell books, occultic amulets, we saw a crystal ball, astral projection to the evil zone, all of this in a children's cartoon. Now, I've got a guest today. His name is Phil Phillips. He's from Texas. He has been involved in missions work in his life, and he has
in the background just says demonism.
Now felt called to study the effects of cartoons and children's toys and even TV programs upon our children today. And I'd like to introduce a...
It's so funny. This video is like distorted right around his mouth the entire time. So it kind of looks like those, like kind of howdy doody, ventriloquist dolls that have like the really pronounced mouth. I don't know. I thought about that the whole video. The devil's in the VHS.
Young man, and Phil, God bless you, and it's good to see you today.
Pleasure being here today, Gary.
Now, Phil, I'll tell you what, 14 years ago, Scooby-Doo was a lot different than what we see today, and I could hardly recognize it. Can you tell me what's going on in this cartoon?
Yes, there's a vast movement toward the occult within the cartoon and toy industry. Most people don't realize that 80% of all cartoons deal directly with the occult, and 40% of the toys on the market have occultic influence, and these are the most popular.
And these toys...
And this, again, I see this every time this conversation comes up. It's so funny to me the lack of media literacy in Christian fundamentalist circles. Like in the clip that they just showed, the witches are the villains in the story. Like if you're going to pull an example, like why would you pick an example where all of the villains are the same people that you view as villains in your theology? Like it's just, again, the thinking that like, oh, this contains reference to this, therefore it is endorsing this, is like the silliest argument ever. And this is the argument that centers around movies like Harry Potter, which, you know, that was like the big thing when I was growing up, was like everyone was like super anti Harry Potter. You know, whether you're talking about like horror movies, like there's like, oh, that movie's demonic because it features a demon in it. And it's like, well, the Bible features demons. Is the Bible demonic? Like the logic doesn't really pan out there.
Toys are actually a mirror of the cartoons. Is that correct?
Right. They're released together. It's a form of marketing where the toys and the cartoons are released together to create this popularity for the toys.
Now, you have a concern. I know that all of this is affecting our youth. And I wanted to know, do you feel that there are a lot of children that are being influenced by the cartoons they watch?
Oh, yes. Take, for instance, a cartoon like He-Man and Masters of the Universe. It can be seen as many as 31 times a week in an area, with a viewing audience as much as 16 million children each time it's aired. And so we're seeing a vast effect on the whole United States and other countries around the world through these cartoons and toys.
Millions of children now watching occultic cartoons and then going out and buying occultic toys. Now, could we say that there is witchcraft and occultic practices that are actually being portrayed in these cartoons?
Oh, yes. The witchcraft and occult practices are not make-believe. They're taken from actual witchcraft, actual pagan religions, levitation, mind control, astral projection, and other forms of witchcraft ceremonies are portrayed within the cartoons.
All of these things are portrayed in the cartoons?
Yes, very much so.
Well, then we could suspect that there's some kind of a spiritual force behind these things to program our children.
Oh, yes. The children receive this in a very different light than we do.
So that's just a delightful little sneak peek at Turmoil in a Toy Box. Like I said, I ordered the book. I'll definitely be going through it, and I will report back with my findings. If you guys want me to react to the full Turmoil in the Toy Box video, I should definitely consider doing that. Maybe that's something I could do over on Patreon. It's not really a good fit for like the main feed, but it could be a fun like Patreon bonus episode or something to watch along and examine that and his incredible research. Okay, let's see. So we marked that one off. Let's rip through some of these. Someone said, are Bible colleges worth the time or effort or money, or just a scam for bigger churches to avoid taxes? I don't know if there's any tax benefits to running a college. I feel like there's probably other tax loopholes that would be more beneficial. So I can't speak to that though. I'm not a finance expert. You know, you could really ask, are colleges worth the time or effort or money, or just a scam? I would say for Bible college, it depends on the Bible college. Like college in general is generally way too expensive, and, you know, the benefit doesn't seem to outweigh the risk or the amount of debt that people take on. And so like there's plenty of conversation we had about college in general, but for Bible college specifically, like the Bible college angle, I think the biggest benefit of Bible college is like the affordability. But with that, you know, comes a lack of credentials. Like some Bible colleges are not accredited. I think if you're going to a college that's not accredited, that's a complete waste of time and money because you're losing any potential benefit. And then I think if you're going to like a ministry school, it's like you can learn like how to function in ministry by doing ministry. I do think there's benefit to being educated in theology and history, but you'll find the programs in many colleges are not particularly robust. You know, I would say like it's a very slim realm of, you know, experience with Bible college where I would say it's worthwhile. The only ones that really seem to have, some reason to exist where it's actually worthwhile would be like if you're going to somewhere like a Pensacola Christian college and taking a nursing program, because they actually have a legitimate, from what I understand from people that I know who've gone through it, a decent nursing program. It's a decent pathway to nursing jobs. I'm sure some people have had different experiences and will let me know loudly in the comments. But, I would say if you're doing something like that, that makes sense. And I would say even the same thing, like, if you're attending a college where you're getting like a broadcasting, hands-on experience, like maybe there's something there. But for the most part, I would say just looking at it logically, it's not really worth it, because most times you're leaving with a piece of paper that is not worth, it's not worth the ink that's printed on it. It's not accredited. It's not going to be looked at seriously by most normal jobs. But like I said, most jobs aren't really that keen on your college experience. So like, I don't know. It just, in terms of Bible colleges, I would say 9 times out of 10, I would say it's probably not worth the money. I didn't go. Maybe my life would be so much better if I had. So I don't know. If you've had a different experience, let me know. What do you think? Is Bible college worth it or not? Okay, 2 more questions here. I'll do this one first. Keep talking about how the justice system is built to protect men who are in positions of power, the CLA, how police handle reports and don't do anything. They deem as not having enough evidence and attack the victim for character blaming. There's a really good book called Complicit that kind of talks about like how culture in general is set up kind of against specifically female victims. But I'll mention, and there's a lot of really good material written about like police handling reports, and like I've covered that on my show where things have been mishandled. But I'll speak to the CLA specifically, and actually pulled up a clip that kind of talks about, why Gibbs started feeling so indebted, to the IFB, specifically with Jack Hyles early on. And I think he's kind of just stayed within that circle because in addition to, sharing the belief system, he also benefits financially immensely from it. And you see that all the way back to his origins with Jack Hyles. This is a video I did a long time ago. It was a video I did on David Gibbs, and it was a part 1, and I still haven't done a part 2. So at some point I'll need to do that if there's still interest in it. But here's some of the kind of backstory on Gibbs specifically. If you haven't seen it, I think it's at least an interesting tidbit. And again, I could talk about this all day long. Like there's tons of research and things relating to the legal system or the way that, Amanda, I don't know how to say her last name. Nayugan, I hope I'm saying it correctly. Her book, Saving 5, talks about the experience of like getting a rape kit process. Like there's so much there, but specifically Gibbs, here's a really interesting tidbit here. That's worth checking out. While the Christian Law Association has been involved in many cases like these, purely defending religious liberty, they've also been connected with some of the most notorious scandals within the independent fundamental Baptist movement. Wherever a case of abuse can be found within the IFB, David Gibbs Jr. is always there with a tear in his eye and lump in his throat, not far behind. Many who've left the IFB have not so jokingly referred to him as the fixer, perhaps first by Darrell Dow of the now inactive Stuff Fundies like Gibbs. I want to interview Darrell Dow so badly. If anyone has a connection to Darrell Dow, or Darrell, if you're watching this for whatever reason, I would love to interview you. That's on my bucket list since I started the show, because that was like one of the few things that was out there when I first started looking into the IFB when I was a teenager, was like the Stuff Fundies like blog. And it was such a helpful resource for me at the time to like see all of this stuff just compiled in a certain place. And so I'd love to just chat with Darrell and, get some history of that website and like the experience running it. Cause like he's an OG, and talking about the IFB. But anyway, side note. His most long-lasting and most notorious friendship was with one of the biggest names in fundamentalist history, Jack Hyles, the pastor of First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana.
He's a man whose life has been touched and empowered by the Holy Spirit. He's a man that has stood with character and integrity that is unreproachable. He's a man that's been an example to every preacher in America.
It's no wonder Gibbs was so loyal to Hyles. Cindy Hyles Scott, the daughter of Jack Hyles and ex-wife of Jack Scott, writes about the relationship in her father's biography, The Fundamental Man. Cindy writes, at pastor school in 1978, a struggling organization called the Christian Law Association was brought before the nation. Over 9,000 pastor school delegates and local church members met in the Chicago amphitheater. As Dad, Jack Hyles, remembers, over $35,000 a month was raised to support David Gibbs and those who worked with him in the Christian Law Association. $35,000 a month is a great way to earn yourself a loyal friend. Gibbs vigorously defended Hyles and partnering ministries publicly for many years in the face of massive controversy. One such controversy is also noted in The Fundamental Man. Cindy Hyles Scott writes, where there are mountaintops, there. So I'll pause that there. But yeah, that's one of the big pieces there is like they were a struggling ministry, and all of a sudden you have this group of pastors that are basically saving your ministry that's kind of like falling apart. 35 grand a month is a good reason to be pretty loyal to a specific group of people. And so I think for Gibbs specifically, like, he's found his loyal audience. He's got a ton of support. He's essentially, I think he describes himself as a legal missionary, or the CLA describes itself as legal missionaries. And so pretty hard to risk losing support by standing with a victim and not the predators who happen to often be leaders within these churches. So that's something there. The last question here is definitely a more serious one. It says, how can I help my little sister deal with sexual assault from her church pastor? She's a wreck. Very heavy question. And it's one that when I got it, I sent it to a couple of friends of mine who are survivors of sexual abuse themselves and wanted to get their feedback. I had my assumptions and the way I would answer the question, but I want to get their feedback. So I'll kind of share their answer pretty much verbatim. I'll shorten some things up or give my own feedback here where I want to. But one of them said, so many questions. Is she pressing charges? Make sure she gets connected with her victim advocate. Get a trauma-informed therapist. Support your sister in whatever way she wants or needs you to, which is so key. Just adding this to myself, I've heard so many survivors tell me that somebody who urgently wanted to help them just like drug them through so many of these processes, but never asked them like what they wanted to see happen, never let them kind of do things at their own pace. And so supporting the victim in the way the victim wants to be supported is huge. And then someone else, one of the other friends that I messaged said, I would say, number one, how old? If she is underage, it needs to be reported to the proper authorities. And then she said, listen to support, not to fix. Follow their lead. Sometimes you want to be like, justice, prison, burn it all down. But they are not in the place for that. Guide and encourage her to see a licensed therapist who deals with trauma. Steer clear of church counselors. If she absolutely wants to go to one, make sure it's a legit one. And by legit one, just literally, are they a licensed counselor who's trauma informed? If you can find that, that's fantastic. But a pastor who offers counseling may not be licensed. So like, just make sure they're legit. Don't make their trauma your circus. I know people feel appalled and want to know all the details and all that. It's their story. She should be the one centered. It's not about you, even though you as a family member are hurting. You have to remove yourself to a degree. And then she said, I remember being frustrated because I felt like people were talking around me and treated me like I had leprosy or something. Also, I stopped going to things because it was the focus of the subject 24/7. People treated it like 60 minutes. It was too close for me. And yeah, I would also mention that too. Like, let people talk at their pace. Some people want to escape it. Some people want to talk about it, and leaving that open to them to determine what they want is so helpful. And then this is one more that I'll mention that was sent to me. It said, don't threaten to kill, hate, beat up, etc. the person who caused the trauma. People don't understand it, but victims were conditioned to protect the perp. They can feel responsibility in the beginning for all the harm that happens. Breakup of a family, etc. It's not their fault, but your brain doesn't know that. This is such a great one. This is why I asked and didn't just run with my assumptions, because like this is not one that would have immediately come to my mind. But I think so often we go like, where are they? And like, if I ever see them, I'm going to do this. Especially when there's been long-term sexual abuse of a victim, like there can be a weird kind of connection there, especially when there's been grooming involved. If you're dealing with, say, a teenage victim who trusts that person or looked at them as almost a father figure at first, like that default instinct is like to not harm them. And then many times what they also mention is, even though you are innocent in this, you are a victim in this, like, it can be easy to feel the guilt of like splitting up a family, or this person's wife is going to be so upset, or she's going to be so hurt, or their kids are going to lose their dad because their dad's going to prison. Like that's all stuff that's a lot to grapple with emotionally. And so that's something to consider as well. But just to echo some of the things that were said here, like depending on the age of your sister, like if they're underage, police immediately, like it needs to go to the police instantly. If they're of legal age, you need to make sure that they clearly understand, what their options are. And I want to be clear too, like there's ways to go and inform the police without pursuing anything. There's ways to file reports just so it's on record. Like you don't have to immediately go into like this massive like legal pursuit. So like understand your options though. The worst thing that I see happen is when people are not ready to take the dive in yet, and you're never fully going to be ready. but then the statute of limitations runs out and they weren't aware that there was a statute of limitations or when it was going to end. So know your options, research, talk to an attorney, talk to someone in law enforcement and see what your options are. But then again, like, give the person space, let them decide what they want to do and what's going to be most helpful for them. It's very easy for us to say like, oh, take them to court, do this, do that. But that's an extremely difficult, lengthy, brutalizing process. And so, be victim focused and see what would be most beneficial for them. But anyway, that's the last question there on the list. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. I did not expect this episode to be as long as it was. Hopefully it was interesting. And I'm trying to do some more, like, I know there's a couple of little cuts here and there, but for the most part, I'm trying to do these relatively uncut, just kind of casual, like us having a conversation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really appreciate all the thoughtful questions. If you have questions you want me to cover on future episodes, just drop it in the comments of this video. I'll take a look, and I might cover it next Friday when I do my next Q&A video. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Eric Skwarczynski. This is the Preacher Boys Podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.